Hi everyone, it's Laura Volpes for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to create a fun and quick ocean-themed card. As a first step, I started working on my background, and I'm going to use Nuvo Shimmer Powders to create an ocean tab background in a very easy and very quick way. So I started off by die cutting some watercolor cardstock to an A2 size using the Darling Ribbon and Frames dies by Studio Katia. I then sprinkled my shimmer powders in the bottom right and top left corner on my panel, and I just localized the powders in those areas because I had my design in mind already. And after sprinkling my powders, I spritzed everything with some water from a distress sprayer and left my panel aside to dry. The colors that I used are Atlantis Burst and Blue Blitz, and while my background was drying, I started working on another panel for my card front. I die cut some white cardstock first again with the A2 rectangle die in the Darling Ribbon and Dotted Frames dies. And then I used this die here from the Scallop Oblong set, also by Studio Katia, to die cut a corner off of the bottom right and the top left portion of my panel. And these are the areas where my ocean background will peek through. At this point, I decided to get a little bit more coverage with my shimmer powders, and this is because my front panel is bright white, whereas the watercolor cardstock is a bit off-white, so it's a bit more yellowish, and I didn't like to see the two cardstocks next to each other, so I added some more shimmer powders to the background, and in this case I also introduced the solar flare, so that the areas that will show in my final card are nicely covered. And by covered I mean that there is little or no watercolor cardstock showing through the shimmer powders. I then moved on and started working on my images, and the stamp set I'll be using today is the Under the Sea stamp set. This was released last year by Studio Katia and I really love it. I was so excited to play with it today and to create another card with this set. I have more inspiration with this stamp set and I will link to it in the description box down below, so if you're interested you can check it out. And I think this will also pair really nicely with the Jawsome stamp set, which was part of the latest release by Studio Katia, which is another favorite of mine. To stamp my images I used Premium Hybrid Black ink by scrapbook.com, and the paper that I'm using is Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock, and for the coloring I am using my Spectrum Noir markers. I chose some blue-gray markers to color in my manta ray, and I'm using BGR5, BGR4, BGR3 and BGR1. And because this area is a little bit large, I'm coming in with several layers so that I saturate the paper and I get a nicer blend. For the jellyfish, I went for some pinks and I chose CR5, CR4, PP2 and PP1. I am shading the left side of the image and I'm leaving the right side lighter, and this will give some nice and round appearance to the jellyfish. And also in this case, to get a nice blend, I went in with a couple of layers. For the seaweed, I'm using some yellow greens and I used CG4, CG3, CG2 and CG1. And I added the shading in the center because there is a line there that suggests a fold. After coloring the images, I die cut them with the coordinating dies to the Studio Katia Under the Sea stamp set. And then I started planning the arrangement of the images on my card, and at this point I realized that I wanted one more green element on that bottom right corner of my card front, so I quickly colored in this image, which is supposed to be a coral, but for the purposes of today's card it will be seaweed. At this point my background with the shimmer powders was dry, and I decided to add a little bit more detail to it with my Nuvo Glimmer Paste in Moonstone and the Studio Katia Brushstrokes Wave Stencil. I'm adding the glimmer paste just in selected areas and I'm not covering the entire background because I wanted to add just a touch of extra dimension and extra shimmer. I had to give my glimmer paste a minute to dry, and in the meantime I stamped the sentiment which reads "Make Waves" on my front panel. The sentiment is also part of the Studio Katia Under the Sea stamp set. And then once my glimmer paste was dry, I could actually go ahead and assemble my card. I decided to raise the front panel over one layer of foam tape. This is Scotch 3M foam tape. And I got a couple of little ink smudges on my card front, and I'm going to use my Tombow mono eraser to get rid of those. I adhered the seaweed flat on the bottom right corner of my card using Nuvo Deluxe adhesive. And then I decided to raise the critters over one layer of foam tape so that they are on the same level as the card front. I also added a couple of air bubbles above the jellyfish, and I had these from a previous project. The stamp with the air bubbles is also part of the Under the Sea stamp set by Studio Katia. And then to add some extra detail to my images and also to lighten up the manta ray, which was slightly darker than I would have wanted it to be, I decided to add some dots and some lines with a Jelly Roll pen. This is a Sakura number 10 Jelly Roll pen. I couldn't stop and I had to add some embellishments to the card front, and this time I chose the Iridescent Bubbles by Studio Katia. These are really gorgeous and I think they mimic air bubbles in the sea very nicely. And to adhere them to the card front, I am using some Studio Katia glue that I put down on a piece of cardstock and a jewel picker. I have my card base ready here, and this is a top folding A2 card base cut at 8.5 by 5.5 inches and scored at 4.25 inches. I mounted my card front on top of my card base, and here is the final result with all the pretty shimmer and sparkle on the background. And that's it for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope I inspired you to create with the Studio Katia Under the Sea stamp set. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.